Okay, great. Hi, everyone. This is consensus layer call 147. And let's see, there's the agenda in the chat. It's PM issue 1211. And yeah, we have a pretty big agenda today. Hopefully we can get to some sort of closure on Pectra. And yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. So first, we could just have like a quick update or check in with any devnets we have going on. We have Mekong, and then otherwise, today we'll talk about Devnet 5. So I'm not sure if there's much else to discuss there, but I'll open it up. Are there any updates we should discuss? Any bugs or issues we should talk about?
Mekong is very stable, so there's no update on Mekong side.
Okay, great. I guess one thing, it did go to 36 million gas, right?
Yes.
Cool. And yeah, so it's been stable, so that's good to see. Cool. Okay, then yeah, let's get into it. Pectra Devnet 5. So there's a spec, and yeah, today there's a number of things essentially finalizing that spec so we can move forward with the DevNet. And yeah, okay, so the first one here, this is kind of an FYI. There was a PR to rename a field in the pending partial withdrawal, and it's been merged. It was just simply changing the name of one of the fields. So yeah, just kind of a heads up. That's there and will be in the next release. And yeah, from here, there's like a number of things to discuss. People wanted some time to engage with this question around changing the gossip limits. Let me grab this PR as kind of a concrete thing to ground the conversation. And yeah, so this PR proposes raising the gossip limit in the spec that we have from 10 megabytes where it is today to 15. And this came up sort of via investigation into raising the gas limit on mainnet. And yeah, it's 30 million today. There have even been calls from the community to raise up to 60 million over like a pretty short timeline. One thing that we consider doing here is changing this gossip limit. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add any more context, or otherwise we can discuss if we want to include this change for Pectra, if not sooner.
I would ideally like to see this gossip limit change at a fork instead of just change a value. So maybe gossip max size with Electra if we end up bumping it.
Right, because I think otherwise it would be weird if some nodes had different limits and there was a block that triggered it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, to be fair, we're kind of getting into that situation where that might happen anyway, because some clients are talking about changing the uncompressed limit on blocks, and that would cause a similar scenario to changing it at any time in the clients. So I think whatever we do, we need to be consistent across all of the CL.
Yeah. That good?
Right, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like we need to make sure that there's no like consensus failures due to this limit. And I think like, I feel like that should just be treated as a bug, that it is the case right now, and we should fix that like right now, and that independently we can raise that limit. But there should be no case where like raising the gas limit leads to a consensus failure. Or
ETD?
like ineffective consensus failure. Yeah.
Right, yeah. ETD, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I've taken a little bit of a look at what the implications are of this limit. So basically, we're talking about a limit of the gossip message size when it's uncompressed, like the payload is uncompressed. And the payload is, of course, the block itself, using the SSZ encoding. And in the SSZ encoding, all of the fields are actually constant sized, or rather they have a constant upper bound, except for the transactions. And the way we encode the transactions is simply a byte list of nearly infinite size. So this kind of simplifies the problem a little bit, at least, because it means that, let's say that we have, 10 megabytes is the maximum gossip size. The maximum transaction list size can easily be derived from there. And it's roughly 300K lower than those 10 megabytes. So we could say that we have, 9.7 megabytes of space available for transactions. And this is the only thing that determines whether or not this limit gets hit. So in this way, we can actually reduce this problem into, an upper bound on the transaction size that an execution client can possibly create, which is good news, I guess, because then at least we can also explore other kinds of options where, well, the two that come to mind is that either we compute a maximum possible gossip size from the gas limit with a little bit of spare room to handle the gas limit going up and down. And we can do this solely based on this transaction field. Or consensus layer clients can actually inform the execution layer that you have this much space available for transactions. Use it in any way you wish. And then the other nice thing about the transaction field being the determinant here is that entirely lives in execution, and it is encoded using, LP or whatever it is that is there, but it's nothing that the consensus layer has to care about. They don't have to know about the encodings and so on. And conversely, by giving this limit this way, the execution layer doesn't have to know anything about the gossip layer either. So I feel like going forward, perspective of now, there are a couple of fairly straightforward ways of addressing this problem properly. Regarding an increase, I think that this is one of the few mechanisms that we have to protect against spam, against amplification attacks, and it's fairly blunt. The smaller it is, the better. As is, a 5 megabyte increase there can give an attacker like 13 gigabytes of traffic if you compute the full amplification. And the reason for this is that we validate the execution component of the block way later than we do gossip propagation. And the final thing I wanted to say on this topic is that I have a PR up that also fixes the ambiguity. In spec, the spec is a little bit poorly worded, so there has been a little bit of confusion of compressed versus uncompressed. But kind of summary of that PR is that we do want to target the uncompressed size with the limit for a lot of reasons. One is because it's easy to reason about. It's easy to derive a transaction limit from it, and so on. It also protects against snappy decompression bombs, which is good. And then from that limit, we can actually compute a maximum allowable compressed size as well. And this is based on the fact that Snappy has an upper bound on how much how much data can expand when you try to compress it. And this is about 10% more than, I think it's like 13 or 14% more than the incoming data size. So we can put a bound on the compressed message by deriving it from the uncompressed maximum size. And this is also good news, and there's a PR coming up for this, yeah, soon.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's helpful to know. Your connection was a little garbled, but essentially, yeah, it sounds like you're open to raising this limit, or at least thinking about it more intelligently. Then the question is, yeah, on what timelines do we do what? There was a number of comments in the chat around, yeah, how we do this. The catch here is that like the only real guarantee we have that all nodes have a certain profile is at a hard fork. Then the question is like, yeah, let's say we want to change this ASAP. How would client teams think about, you know, pushing this to their users and actually making this happen? Like, for example, there was a comment, I think from Preston, just to put minimum versions on this Pump the Gas website. Do we feel like that's like a sufficient directive?
I can answer that. I think that it's, you know, wherever we're pushing the message of, you know, hey, 40 million is okay, or, you know, even 60 million is okay. You say, as long as you're looking at this because there's a known issue. My support for releasing as soon as possible this change is that the gas limit will change outside of the hard fork, and we know there's a problem and we can fix it. So why not fix it now? It doesn't seem that controversial to me. Yeah, some validators don't update often, but you know, they're missing out on other bugs that happen on a regular basis anyway. So, you know, they should be updating frequently, I think, as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it's a little bit split. Like one option is to go ahead and try to get this updated as soon as possible. Would anyone be against that? And yeah, there's another comment that made a good point. Like with Pectra, this should all be resolved. 7623 here helps quite a bit. Then the question is just like between now and then, how do we want to handle this? What we probably don't want is to have different clients do different things in the meantime. So ideally, we could agree to do the same thing, whether that's no change today or that's push for some raise as quickly as possible. But yeah, ATD.
Yeah, so I'm kind of against upgrading on principle. I think that we still have a little bit of time to reason about this problem. It seems that the response from the community about not going into a gas limit situation that exceeds these bounds has been fairly positive so far. And like this would effectively mean that we're changing the rules of the protocol outside of a hard fork, which is a new kind of expectation that we have on the community. Like normally we should expect that unless there's like a die-hard bug, we should expect that users should not have to update their clients between, you know, hard forks, as it were. But if we are going to do this, we should certainly do it all together. And we should certainly also update the config, because there exists the possibility for users to simply override their local config and use whatever version they already have. And then we should put out that recommendation as well. I think the risk here is indeed the unupgraded nodes. Because what happens with unupgraded nodes is that we effectively create a split in the network, right? A network-based split instead of a consensus-based split. But at the end of the day, those nodes that have an old version are still capable of building a new block or following a new chain or building a different chain, depending on the relative weights of validators that they have on them, right? And this is not pretty either. Like none of these two options are really fantastic.
Right. I mean, one small pushback is like if there was, say, a consensus failure today, like we would go fix it today. So, you know, it's not
Yeah,
that
but there
we
isn't.
can never touch the, you know, the protocol in between hard forks.
But I mean, this
No, of course,
is
but
effectively a bug. Like this is like there is like if this limit was enforced consistently, then there would not be a problem. Like then we would just have like ineffective additional block size limits. So the problem right now, in my opinion, is just that it's not consistent. We don't need to raise it if every client has exactly the same way of determining it. And of course, if we stop self-builders from building blocks that are too large.
I mean, the spec is unambiguous. Or the spec
So
is
then,
in the sense correct. The differences in interpretation are rather minimal to the best of my knowledge. We all talk about the limit being on the uncompressed size, except maybe a few older versions of clients, or maybe this has been fixed recently. But by and large, in the tests that at least Pari have run, we certainly see this limit kicking in, right? It does disrupt the network when blocks become larger. So it's, insofar as practical reality goes, it's correctly implemented.
okay, so then what's the problem? Then we just don't build blocks that large and then it's fine.
The problem is that execution clients, or like we don't know if, for example, builders can build smaller blocks once a large transaction hits their mempool, whether they are able to exclude large transactions from their mempool when they are building blocks, and this limit has been exceeded. So somebody posting a really large transaction could kind of poison the mempool, and it would be hard for block builders to not include this transaction, except by, you know, a lower gas limit, and they would have to implement a new feature in order to put a limit on the total length of the transaction RLP, which is the real limit here, or the size limit. I mean, that's a feasible way forwards as well.
I think we should do that.
But that requires their agreement.
Yeah.
Enrico, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so in that case, I guess the short circuit breaker will save us and anyway progress the chain with some bumps. And the builder will be forced to implement something to fix quickly. So I would say that in general, I think that I agree with Dankra that there is a bug around here, and this must be fixed to have all the clients behave the same, and this is the most important thing. And I also agree with Jacek that having something better in controlling how the block is built is definitely a very good thing to have. That give us a better control over the sizes of data floating around, and I think this is a valuable thing to implement. And if it is safe at the end to have to remain with a 10 megabyte limit for a while, I think it makes sense, and we have time to address these details and have a better control over the block size, and we may not need to move this limit never, essentially.
Yeah, Terrence.
So just to clarify on the bug a little bit, Paul is also mentioned in the chat right? Because now the issue is that the attacker could just flood the local mempool with cheap transactions, and then like builder one like probably like will be whether they will be fast enough to react. That's a different story. But then like the problem here is that say today like no one can build a block anymore. So the only way to fix this is literally to send transactions to the main pool. They end up paying more to the attackers stuff. So I don't think the circuit breaker can save us unless today we basically override those transactions on the public main pool.
All right, right. So you're not. So Jacek was meant to say that this is a problem in the building process of every execution client. Is not a builder problem.
Right.
That's correct.
Well, a little bit of both. And like, yeah, maybe to summarize so far, it sounds like a pragmatic path forward at this moment would be one, like ensuring that all CL clients have conformance to the spec around this limit as specified today at 10 megabytes. And then separately, the ask would be to change the transaction rules in EL clients such that you can't get these massive transactions. Was that correct?
I think that's correct insofar as that proposal goes. The counter proposal here is simply that we just wing it and everybody increases their limits to a point where, you know, realistically all these blocks get through, and we hope that people upgrade and maybe there will be a few chain splits along the way.
Right.
And then
And
we also increase the attack surface and we deal with that later.
right.
I think the
And so I guess
urgency of the matter is the crux here. I think most of the things get solved by Pectra, which addresses the root cause of this problem, which is a gas mispricing in my view, because it's simply too cheap to create. Like the thing to remember here is that is what the EIP about increasing the gas cost for certain things says, which is basically that the average block is something like, you know, let's say 100 kilobytes or less even, and that's the useful kind of transactions that people post on chain. And then these attack transactions, if we will, these message transactions, they're first of all filled with zeros, which means that they compress well. So it's not that bad. But the second thing is that it's the gas pricing that allows people to create these transactions, and the gas prices don't correctly capture the true cost of transactions this big. So increasing
right.
the gas price kind of solves this.
All right.
In the
So
same
this
way
is,
that,
yeah.
in the same way that Shanghai, we had a gas mispricing on, you know, hard drive access,
Right.
and the gas price failed to capture the true cost of that particular thing.
Yeah. So POTUS has a good point here that you can still do this with many smaller transactions. So yeah, that kind of puts a hole in this proposal to think about limiting this just at the EL.
Well, no, the EL can still bound the list, the transaction list size. Like an entirely dumb implementation in the transaction pool is actually to just construct your list of transactions as normal and then cut it off at the limit. Like that will solve the problem. And it's a byte limit on the RLP encoding, so it's something that the EL can comfortably do on its own if we go down that route.
Okay, so then it wouldn't necessarily be about changing mempool propagation limits, but just when you're building, look at the actual size.
Yeah, that's one
that
possible
makes more
solution,
sense.
and it's
Right.
not. There's not a lot of interaction going on here between EL and CL. The EL can implement this with a chain constant, basically. And I've put the exact value for this constant in ETH research. We can easily derive it from the Gossip max limit. It's a simple function.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my one thing with this proposal is that then we need ELs to make a change. And then the question is like, can we coordinate ASAP? You know, the next ACDE would be next week. And it's also, I think, the last one this year. So just something to keep in mind, like logistically. Nishant, you have your hand up? I can't hear you if you're speaking. But you did unmute. Yeah, Nishant, I think you might have some audio issues. Dankrad?
Yeah, I mean, I think so right now we are on track for an increase to 36 million. So it's not like something that will have to be fixed right now in a way, because I don't think many people will increase beyond that. But I think generally speaking, like whatever else we do, like even with 7623, like still having an inconsistent limit and having like an EL that can create blocks larger than that is still a bug in my opinion. Like even if we now have a fix that means, oh yeah, like we can't imagine hitting that again, like, well, who knows, in 5 years we might be at 1 billion gas and suddenly out of nothing the same bug hits again. Like I think like we should just really make sure that we squash this once and for all, even if it takes like a few more weeks. But I think like it's not acceptable to have this discrepancy.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone agrees with that. And it seems like the path forward there is having this gossip limit somehow be a function of the gas limit. Yeah, Nishant, your hand's back up. I don't know if you can talk. Okay, he had a comment in the chat. My point was that it's much easier to change the limit in the CL rather than mess with the ELs. Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. So it sounds like the immediate thing we can do is again ensure the conformance with CLs in the spec. And yeah, I don't know if any EL devs are on the call and want to speak to the complexity of bounding payload sizes during build time. Yeah, Ben.
I mean, it's more complicated, and you're also just pushing a consensus failure into a different place, because then you've still got the issue with all the ELs trying to coordinate outside a hard fork to get the right version. You know, it doesn't make the problem any easier.
Well, the ELs not doing anything would not create a consensus failure. It would just be a failure to produce blocks by those ELs who haven't upgraded.
So they would it would only be in block production. They would accept blocks over size. Is that what you're saying? So if a non-upgraded EL produces an oversized block, you know, that's fine. Okay, now you hit the problem again.
No, that block would just be like not accepted. It would just disappear.
Only if you also change the validation rules for the ELs to reject blocks that are too large.
I don't think anyone is proposing that.
In which case the ELs would accept the blocks and you hit the CL issue, the inconsistency.
All blocks, like to be accepted by the EL, a block has to be accepted by the CL.
Yeah, which has inconsistent rules.
Right, yeah, this has to be fixed for sure.
What needs to be fixed? Like it seems like the EL will never even receive the block because the CLs will not be able to send it over gossip.
Yeah.
So what is
What
the
has
change
to be
that you
fixed?
propose for ELs?
Me?
Okay, so
Oh.
yeah, for CLs, there's some question of like following the spec as it is today, and so that will be resolved ASAP. Then the question is like, what do we want to do now versus, you know, wait until Pectra? And one option would be thinking about bounding the size of the payload produced. the other option I'm kind of hearing is we just go with a more sort of reasoned solution that might take a little bit longer, but again, given this isn't like an immediate issue today, we probably have some time to do that.
Is there something that we can actually do outside the fork? Like we are putting 7623 in the fork, and that's going to solve this issue on the EL side.
Yeah, so the longer term solution here would be having this gossip limit be a function of the gas limit, which would just like solve it for all time.
But why not just make
That's-
the gossip limit 50 megabytes or something much larger? Like what function does it actually serve?
It prevents DOS attacks. So, like as a CL client, you don't want to like have to think about handling a huge block. And then, the resulting propagation through the network and everything that entails.
I feel like also here there's something weird, like does the current, like my intuition is the current limit doesn't really effectively prevent any attacks. Like, does it? Can someone speak to that? Like we're just
Well,
basically
if
saying,
someone
oh,
sent like a 100 megabyte block, that would just be rejected.
Mhm.
Whereas like if it's much smaller, then you don't have to think
But
about
that's just a local thing, right? Like that is a peer of mine, because like I will not forward the like 100% that's an invalid block, so I will never forward it anyway. So the only thing that could happen is that one of my peers sends me that block. But like a peer spamming me with messages like is a problem that you can't really prevent anyway. So I don't really exactly know what this
Yeah.
limit prevents, why 10
I-
megabytes really makes a difference there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I think that in general, you're always going to be able to make the peer do work, where you have some sort of message that you send the peer, and they do an amount of work that is not really that does not really correlate with the message size that you sent. And that attack is always going to be worse than just blindly DOSing them with big pieces of data.
So I can actually answer to that. This limit exists because if we don't have it, there's an amplification attack. And the amplification attack happens because the execution payload is validated asynchronously with respect to gossip propagation. So the way it works is that we receive the message in full. We perform a couple of gossip pre-checks, we can call them. The most significant check there is really the proposer signature. But other than that, we don't check anything really. So in particular, we don't check that the execution payload is valid. So it could be stuffed with invalid transactions. It could be stuffed with junk. We don't know. We don't care. We give that to the EL to validate, and then the EL takes, it's 1 or 2 seconds to validate the block. But all that happens asynchronously. By this time, we've already started repropagating the message. So what happens basically is that we can ask the network to propagate invalid messages through this little loophole. So for example, I did a quick like back of the envelope calculation, and if I did the math right, which I don't always do, but in this case, I landed at like 13 gigabytes of traffic for a 5 megabyte increase. And this is because, we have a fairly high fan out on the messages, 7-ish, 8. And this kind of repeats for every hop. So you cause these big pulses of data just flooding the network if you're hell-bent on executing this particular attack. And the reason we have the limit is because that amount of data is like feasible to clear within a slot, and we get a new chance for a new block at the next slot to sort of clear the pipes. The larger that limit is, the more potent this particular attack becomes, and the easier it becomes to kind of make the next guy miss their slot because the gossip subchannel is busy spamming this massive message around. So that's what we're protecting against here.
Okay. I do think we should time box this to get to other things on the agenda. what I'm hearing is, okay, one, first off, like CLs should double check that they follow the spec as written today correctly. If not, definitely need to send out updates. That one's straightforward. Then it sounds like what we want to do is take a little more time to think about what like the nice solution here is with respect to this gossip limit and the gas limit. The other sort of path would be moving ahead with bumping the gossip limit. To me, given the fact that, yeah, it'll be, a messy rollout, or at least, it could be messy. And what I mean when I say that is just we won't know, which nodes have updated and which have not. That to me feels like more of a nuclear option that we should have in the back pocket if we need it. But again, given that gas limits probably won't raise before Pectra in a way that's going to be an issue, we have a little breathing room there. Does that sound like a good path forward to anyone, or does anyone want to suggest something else? Okay, I'll take the silence as agreement. There is some thumbs up in the chat, so let's do that. And yeah, I mean, I think everyone's very aware of what's going on, so please just keep an eye on things. If, for example, the gas limit does raise over the next few weeks, we'll need to be pretty active in addressing this. Cool. So we'll just table this PR for now, but it's here. Okay, we can then move on to other things for Devnet 5. The next, I think, big thing I want to talk about is 7762. And there's some helpful context here, reaching out to rollups. What do I want to say? So yeah, maybe to kick things off. So with 7742, right now the EIP proposes passing the target to the EL, but not the max. And as people implemented this, we kind of found there are places where we would want the max for the EL to have. In particular, this came up with the RPC. There's like an API endpoint that gives you like the blob fee history. I think it's something like blob gas use ratio or something like this, where you do need the max. And then there's from there sort of the bigger question, like, are there other places where the EL might want the max? Another place that kind of came up would be the mempool. And in any case, it sounds like, just passing the target is probably not the way to go. So then the question is, how do we want to address this? We did reach out to the roll call that happened the other day and asked them if they use this particular API. Carl, I think you had some updates there. If you want to give us just a quick overview.
Yeah, very quickly. So of course we don't have necessarily everyone on the call who's able to answer this question, but from the people that were there / have reached out after roll call, currently Scroll, ZK Sync, Arbitrum, and the OP stack chains don't use this blob gas used ratio endpoint. And the only one that I have heard back that does is Linear. They said if we were to remove it, they could figure out an alternative solution, but they have a preference for leaving it in if possible. And then the other concern that was raised is potentially wallets might use this for pricing in the future, but this is not something that anyone was aware of happening at the moment. So overall, I'd say weak preference for leaving this endpoint in. Yeah, that's all I have on that.
Cool, thanks. So yeah, I mean, someone does use it, but yeah, it sounds like there are workarounds, and otherwise, there's not like it's not like critically used generally. So that being said, then the question is, okay, like if we do want to keep the max, do we send it over in the engine API? How is that structured? There's like a couple different options. One of them is just sending it over with the target on every block. We then probably want to put it in the header, or at least it needs to kind of live somewhere that the EL has access to. And to that point, another option would be some sort of like status sort of exchange when the EL and CL boot over the engine API, and then the EL would just like capture the max and like save it somewhere. But point being is, as we started exploring all of this, we kind of even asked the question, like, should we have 7742 at all? The reason we initially had it was a couple of things. I think two big things was, one, it wasn't as flexible to change these limits in CLs and ELs. And this would kind of be a forcing function to make this more easily configurable. The other thing is, if you do go all the way with 7742, you do uncouple the EL and CL, and then you could imagine a CL only fork where you change these blob limits, which is just like really nice flexibility to have. So that all being said, there was another proposal to handle this differently, where you just essentially have this configurability notion. You would remove 7742 from Pectra. And then, for example, you could imagine in like the Genesis JSON that clients have, in the configuration they have, you would have these blob limits there instead. So you still have them coupled. You would kind of lose the CL only fork option, but it would probably be a much simpler implementation. It would take an EIP out of Pectra and probably simplify things on that front. So yeah, there's a comment from my client in favor of removing. Anyone else have any thoughts here? What could also be helpful is if others have implemented this, just speaking to like its complexity. I mean, it could be the case that, yeah, given that we want to ship Pectra ASAP and where we are in the sort of the development process, we might just prefer a simpler solution.
Yeah, so this was actually something that Mikhail observed, but I would agree with it, and that the 7742 creates this assumption effectively, or bakes it in, that every single block is coming over this engine API or some other interface, however specified. I assume that if 7742 happens, then people will like realize this and backfill this and look out every other way to specify a block and say, oh, we need to add it there too. But the point is that ELs will start assuming. I mean, the point of how this works is ELs start assuming that this is how they get sort of, let's say, full, complete block packages, and Nimbus, and at least I believe at least one of those CL has a situation where it will verify block hash locally. That saves a lot of time while syncing to not send every single block. We've benchmarked this, etc. That creates problems. And again, I'm just sort of repeating what Mikhail kind of said in Discord, but especially around forks. But in general, like there's this uncertainty of, well, what if the number of blobs changes, etc. If it is truly dynamic, then it might change frequently, and at that point, the EL needs its own access either to hear about it from the CL every block, or for it to be not that important, or to have access in some other way. But if it has access in some other way, then it doesn't need the CL to provide that information.
Right. I mean, another option is we essentially do 7742, but then still have like some config in the Genesis. Yeah, I mean, it'd be helpful, I think, to hear how we're feeling around implementation complexity, or even like the testing load. I think that would help us think about Pectra inclusion. Mario?
Yeah, I think in terms of at least execution layer testing, we're almost there. We have all the changes implemented. I think the max limit inclusion wouldn't be such a burden. But yeah, it's basically almost there.
Okay.
A quick question. Even if max value is included in each EL block, so EL has this information, won't it be required by any potential use case that EL client should know the max in advance? So if the max is going to be updated since the next block maybe somehow also needed. Like what I'm trying to say is that probably there is a use case where EL needs to know the schedule of target and max for kind of like dependent on the forks, not only the historical max and target.
Yeah, I'm not sure if any EL devs can speak to that. But yeah, I'm trying to keep up with the chat here. I mean, it looks like there is some preference for going with the simpler approach at the moment.
Yeah, I guess just from my perspective, the proposal is just not really doing quite what we had originally hoped, and we realized, like we're realizing with many things like gas limit, gossip size of the CL, these things don't live in isolation, and it's just not realistic to expect there to be one uniform place to change these things when we have two different clients with two different stacks with two different networks. And we're just seeing places where max blobs are needed in the EL, so we're going to find a way to get that data over there. And if we're not changing the value of the max blob count on like a per block basis, it's still on a per fork basis, then it's pretty straightforward for us to have a unified config between the two clients. And adding it to the engine API adds just like unnecessary complexity. Adding it to the header adds unnecessary complexity.
Yeah, I guess the question I have there, if we go with the route to just have it in the config on both EL and CL, like how, like, do we need to specify this somewhere? Like, how do we actually implement that? I don't believe there's like an EIP for this Genesis config structure.
I think that the Genesis config, like we could create an EIP, we could create a gist, it doesn't really matter. But if this is how we're going to be doing the devnets, then every client is going to implement the thing, or else they're not going to get included in the devnets. So I think that's like a pretty strong forcing function for getting people to do this.
Yeah. Dankrad? Dankrad, you have your hand up. I'm not sure if that was from
Oh,
earlier.
sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, like I think it's crazy to have this in both clients and keep this as like something that has to be kept in sync between the two. Like to me, that's tech debt, and we should eliminate it. Like back when we started with the two, like CL and EL, we were like, yes, this is cool, so we can iterate on both sides independently. But now we end up always having to have all hard forks exactly in sync. And like, yeah, I mean, my prediction is this is going to be okay. So now Pectra has to be coupled to the next EL fork, and then, I mean, that's just insane to me. Like that we are okay with like slowing down something potentially by month, like because one constant has to be changed in the other time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
don't
there'd
really
be a slowdown of months.
Yeah.
I mean, right now we're talking about like a constant being fixed in the CL in order to have a higher gas limit, and we're already practically saying, oh, we can't really do it before Pectra. I think practically speaking, it does feel like that's where it's gonna end up.
I mean, I feel like it's not that we can't do it before Pectra. It's just how are you going to get everyone to update their clients to support this new constant before Pectra? Like, do you want to just have a new hard fork in 1 month that just does this config?
But isn't this the same thing? Like,
I mean, it is
again,
the same thing, but like, I feel like this doesn't really have to do as much with the CL-EL breakdown here. It's that CLs are also focusing on shipping their own portion of the fork, and it's kind of a side quest to just update this constant and push the releases out and get everybody on board with that. Like,
exactly, and
we
then
can do
we
it.
will be. Let's say we're ready to ship peer dust, but like the EAL needs another 2 months for their side of the next EL fork. You don't think we'll be in the same situation where EL clients will now say, oh yeah, but like it doesn't make sense to make this mini release now. Let's just do it together with the hard fork.
I just don't think these things are in like pure isolation. Like bumping this constant on the CL for the gossip max size. This is not something that you could just mindlessly do. Just as you can't mindlessly increase the blob limit with respect to the transaction pool on the execution layer. So I think that the conversation is just always going to have to go both ways. There's always going to be discussion about the safety of doing these things. Has the other side implemented the necessary protections to deal with this higher load?
Right. So there are a few other updates around the CAP that have come in. So maybe we'll take a look at those, and that might give us a sense of, impact for Pectra. One of them is pretty simple, but there was an EIP update that the ETHBot kind of merged on me when I didn't want it to. It's this here in the chat. And it was just clarifying the EIP because the way it was written, well, more than clarification, but the way it was written, it was suggesting to look at the current target blob count when really we should be using the parent. So that's all this does. But point being is there's a small change here, and that will then, we'll need a round of updating testing, we'll need a round of updating implementations. So that will take some time. The other thing is there was another conversation on the engine API. And again, this is somewhat minor, but I think we'll probably want to refactor some of how this PR is written to align it with essentially how we handle the parent beacon block root. It's like a similar thing where the CL is passing this data. So again, pretty minor change, but we will likely need to address that. So that all being said, it does feel tight to do all that, get it ready, and then have Devnet 5 and say like the next week or two. I guess maybe then we could check in, like, do we have a timeline for Devnet 5? I mean, I think we'd like to get it done this month, but then realistically, that is only a couple weeks left. And then I guess the alternative, yeah, Mario.
Yeah, I mean, from the side of testing, at least for the execution part, we're, I think, almost ready. The problem is that even if we make a release, let's say today or tomorrow, with every change that we had already considered before this call, even then, I think there's going to be like a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of issues that need to be addressed when the clients start consuming these tests. So even optimistically releasing today, I don't see Devnet 5 happening even maybe next week. I don't, but I'm not that optimistic, to be honest. Yeah, just wanted to put that out.
Right. I mean, the other option is if we go with the configuration route for the time being, that will also take some time to build out. Yeah, I mean, it seems like consensus is somewhat split on this. I see some comments that say preference to take it out. There's definitely a demand to leave it in. I mean, I guess one question is like, how much thrash would it be to take it out now? Like, is it the case that it's pretty much there? If we do move ahead with it, then we'd probably need to think about this RPC endpoint. And I think for like Devnet 5, let's say, we could just kind of leave it as is, even if it would be broken. But yeah, that is something we need to address down the line. I will say I very much like simplicity. And while I hear the benefits of having sort of the full 7742, if we do think it's just simpler at the moment to go with the configuration approach, that sounds nice. Wrath, we need to undo some work. Okay. So then if we leave it in, yeah, would we be, yeah. I think this is a hard call to make. So if we leave it in, then we would want to figure out some way to handle the max. But then we could just kind of leave it broken for Devnet 5, and then we need to address it in Devnet 6.
Why can't we solve it the same way as the target?
Well, so we can, but then it's just like you're sending over this number that basically never changes, and then it's just there for all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was this comment like adding them to the header is probably more work than undoing it. And I guess that's the other. Knew what?
That this number will rarely ever change. Like when 7742 was proposed.
Right, and but we also didn't think we would need to send it over to the EL. I mean, it feels to me like removing it would just simplify Pectra, honestly. And then going ahead with the configuration change and having that for Devnet 5. Yeah, Oscar says keeping it in, but without the max seems like the worst option. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I mean, I think that's what I lean towards. And I mean, there's always the option to revisit this in the future and go for, a more sort of, at least having more time to think about how to handle this without then having to delay Pectra. So yeah, I mean, there's some other comments here in favor of simplicity. So yeah, I mean, I think we should just go ahead and take it out. Anyone super strongly opposed to that? Otherwise, I think we just go ahead and do that. Yeah, which simplifies so ELs will need to do that, but we can just kind of ignore the EIP. The engine API, we can ignore that. And then, yeah, there was some work merged into the CL specs, but yeah, I think Justin Travaglia made a comment, but yeah, I can help you with that as well, Justin. We can get that done ASAP. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I suppose if there's a compromise here, the compromise is that we cannot let, for example, if we're ready to ship peer DOS or change the block counts in any future fork, we cannot let the ELs kind of quote hold things hostage here. So let's just I'll agree to that. Okay. Let's keep moving on. So that's 7742. Okay, so there are a few things around 7251. What do we have here? So this first one, Mikhail had a PR to limit the consolidation balance via the effective balance. I have not had a chance to look at this yet, but there are some approvals on the PR. Mikhail, would you want to give an overview of the changes here?
Yeah, sure. So just recall on how consolidation happens. First, the source is exiting, where we churn validator, where we churn the effective balance, so which is actually the balance that is exiting, and then after it exited, we move the balance when the withdrawal epoch comes, and the existing spec uses max effective balance as the limitation for the balance that will be moved. And yeah, this creates some asymmetry and discrepancy because we likely want to use, it's more reasonable to use effective balance in this place as well. because kind of effective balance is exiting, and then we move the effective balance of max, the balance that has exited. So now it's different, and there are some edge cases with that as well, that are listed in this PR description. So yeah, basically that's a fix for this small discrepancy. And also there are some tests in the PR, more extensively testing the balance that is moved, the balance moved during consolidation. So yeah, this, I think it would be great to have this in Devnet 5. So we need to just merge it. And if there is an opposition from client teams to, I don't think it's like a deal to implement it. It's basically fixing one line. So if there is an opposition, please let us know.
Yeah, has anyone else had a chance to look at this? But yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. It seems like a pretty simple change. I would think we go ahead and get it merged, in the next day or two for Devnet 5. So yeah, in the interest of time, if anyone wants to review this async, yeah, take your feedback to the PR. Otherwise, yeah, Mikhail, I can work with you on getting this merged. This seems like a straightforward change. Okay, so there's that one. And then the other 7251 thing was this PR. This one is a little more complex. But essentially there's an issue with like the distribution of like sampling when you go to think about proposer shufflings, and also the sync committees. Given the way that we have this like max EB, basically the math kind of just doesn't work out with what we have, using sort of 1 byte as this point of comparison. And this PR suggests using 2 bytes. There's some really nice, there's a nice spreadsheet here that makes the math, I think, pretty concrete. And it essentially just smooths out all these different probabilities, let's say, given max EB. So again, I'm not sure if people have had a chance to look at this, but yeah, it's a pretty straightforward change and seems to make things a bit nicer. So yeah, any feedback on this at the moment? I don't know if there's something else, Justin, to add. This was a PR you raised.
No, that was good. Thank you.
Okay, we got a let's merge. I mean, this one is a little more invasive even than the prior one, but yeah, it does seem to make things much nicer. So how about this? Yeah, please see all clients take a look, and even later today, definitely by tomorrow. Otherwise, yeah, the intent will be to have it in the next release for Devnet 5. Cool. Okay, I think from here, there were some EL focused things, and one of them was another comment from roll call. Ansgar brought up this in the chat, and Carl had a summary in his comment here on the agenda, and it was around 7762. Ansgar or Carl, I'm not sure if you want to give us an update there.
Yeah, so basically, actually, this is basically a no-op update because last week we decided preliminarily to not include this EIP, which is this EIP to basically establish a minimum blob base fee. I had argued last week quite vehemently that we should add it, and so we decided to revisit this week with some feedback from rollups in between. And in the past, there had actually been quite a bit of desire from rollups to have this. But now on roll call, we talked about it, and it seemed like basically rollups have been able to more or less work around this for now. So actually, it is lower urgency than I had perceived it. So with that feedback in mind, and given that we decided last week to only include it if really there was a strong case for that, it seems to me like the best thing to do here is to just go ahead without it for Pectra, and then given that in Fusaka we wanted to make bigger changes to the fee market anyway, I would assume that it will be part of that change then. And apologies for taking up so much space last week then, given that that seemed to be lower urgency than I expected it to be.
Okay, and sorry, I was looking at something else. Basically, you're saying we don't need to think about this EIP for Pectra.
I think it would still be a good change, but given the situation in Pectra, I think yeah, it's fine to leave it out.
Okay, then I would suggest we don't put it in. And yeah, thanks for the update. Thanks for reaching out to roll call, both of you. That's super helpful to get L2 inputs on these questions. Okay, there was a point to follow up with the BLS precompiles. I know there was a separate thread of work to finalize the gas schedule. I'm not sure if anyone here has any updates there on the progress. Mark?
Yes, so we split it into 3 PRs to discuss different operations separately. And first PR, this includes simple operation like add, multiplication, and map. And we have a strong consensus among all people. Second PR for pairing, I think we have consensus here as well, at least no objections. And third PR, this is for multi-scalar multiplication. And in this case, we got consensus from all clients because numbers from benchmarks are correct across all clients. However, Pavel raised a valid concern today that if we proceed with the current pricing, it will create a weird pattern in smart contracts where they might implement a fallback to normal multiplication for multi-scalar multiplication with a single point. And Pavel just sent new numbers that take this issue into account. So clients will have to add a small simple if with a fallback to multiplication on their side, and we'll benchmark it again. And I think that's it about BLS.
Okay. And the idea would be to merge all of these PRs. I haven't had a chance to look at these yet.
So I think after we merged them all together, so after we benchmark this third PR with multi-scalar multiplication, we could merge it.
Okay. Is that something we can do by next ACDE?
Yes, we have to.
Okay, great. Cool. Okay, then yeah, any EL clients listening, take a look at these PRs. Thanks everyone who's been busy working on this. I know there's been a pretty active investigation to get this over the line. And then, yeah, we'll have these final benchmarks for the MSM and sort that out next week. Cool. Okay. I think that was the Devnet 5 stuff. Were there any other like spec level issues or concerns people had? Yeah, so that was my next question, Barnabas. So then, yeah, we can turn to timing. You know, there's still a number of things that will change from today's call and even next week's call. Then the question is, yeah, how quickly can we get all of that together? It would be great to launch Devnet 5 before the end of the year, but we are halfway through December, so that is what it is. Yeah. Barnabas says launch it on Christmas. Yeah, I mean, the one thing is I'm not like, I imagine there'll be things around Pectra that we'll need to discuss next week. So definitely, you know, we can move as quickly as we can. I think the CL thing should be settled today, and so people can get a head start there. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not sure how to make things move faster. Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, something that could be helpful here is like, do people have a sense of like how long implementation would take given the changes today? You know, is it something you feel like you could turn around in the next week, or is it maybe going to take a little bit longer?
I mean, the config, adding the target and max to a config should be very simple.
Yes.
So I think the only thing we are waiting for now is the BLS stuff, right?
Yeah, and there's a few other PRs here, but they're all pretty minor, say with 7251. What else did we talk about? Yeah. And there's this one at the beginning, but that's just a renaming a field. So yeah, I mean, it is all somewhat small in scope. And yeah, we're getting a bunch of chat comments. That would be pretty quick. So do we want to look at the calendar here? Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Do we want to try to launch Devnet 5 on the 20th, or is that unwise?
I mean, if all the CL changes.
Yeah, I think at the very least we'll get local configs. So whichever clients are ready, they can have stuff to test on. And we'll have Hive up so we can see how clients are doing. But yeah, if there are enough clients ready, I think I'm happy to launch the DevNet between Christmas and New Year's.
Okay. So yeah, then let's, directionally aim for Devnet 5 as soon as it's ready. And that's going to be in the next couple weeks. So yeah. Yeah, as like client says, Merry Grindiness. But that being said, I think the sooner we can get this together, the sooner we can ship Hectra. So yeah, that would definitely be best. And yeah, Terrence, we can update the spec reflect the Devnet 5 spec reflecting these updates after the call. Okay, cool. Okay, I think that was it on Pectra. If there are any other comments, please raise them. But if not, then we can turn to a few other things. I put this here under sort of the pure DOS bucket. There's this PR for a FuLu spec. And the reason this is relevant to the blob stuff is that this was essentially the next step for pure DOS DevNets. Everyone's very busy with Pectra. That being said, as soon as Pectra is stable, then we could think about putting pure DOS on top of it, and that means FuLu. So I think the concrete ask here was just double check that we can go ahead and move forward with this refactoring. Anyone opposed to that? Barnabas had a comment here on the PR, but it looks like you crossed it out. I think this was discussed on either another PureDOS call or the testing call earlier this week, and from what I heard, there was, agreement to move ahead with this. So yeah, let's go ahead and merge that then, unless there are any final objections. And I'm not hearing them. So cool, we'll go ahead and do that. And nice, okay. There was one last thing. Tim had an ask to discuss this PR, clarifying the relationship between CFI and SFI. Tim, do you want to take it over?
Yes. I don't have the PR handy, but so actually the idea is to clarify the definitions of CFI and SFI based on the DevNet development stage. So I think there's two failure modes we run into when we plan these hard forks. The first is that we don't have quite a formal definition of what CFI means, and it's hard for different people to interpret that. We sort of have to read the tea leaves a little bit. And then the second is we commit to having a bunch of stuff in the fork in advance of actually knowing how hard or how much time it'll take to implement it. So my proposal would be to map CFI and SFI to DevNet inclusion status, where we just formally say that CFI means these are things we want to put in a DevNet for the fork. So it's kind of a clearer signal, and it's already sort of implied by it, but you can think of CFI as the list of anything that we think will be in any of the current forks DevNets. And assuming everything goes well there, probably on the mainnet fork, but there's always some uncertainty. And then I'd make SFI mean the things that are in the next DevNet. And the rationale there is that this could help us sort of throttle how many things we bring in at once. Whereas with Pectra, as we saw, we like brought in 20 things in the fork early on before most of them were implemented. And one challenge with that is not only do we not know how long things will actually take to implement, but then if we have many different things that many different teams have to implement, not everyone makes progress on the same thing at the same time, and that slows things down overall. So basically, we would say, like in this case, SFI would be the things we think will be in DevNet 5. And if we want to add more things to that after the fork, that's great. It can be in CFI, but we sort of don't move something up until we feel like in the next DevNet we can implement it. So that's the overall idea. Thanks, Alex, for sharing the PR in the chat. Yeah. Any thoughts,
thanks.
comments, concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense. Pectra was an unwieldy fork, and I think it's in part because of what you were calling out that, yeah, there was maybe not as much structure around having an EIP or some proposal and then thinking about how it goes through the process to get to DevNets. And yeah, my read is that this is not meant to add more bureaucracy or slow things down, but more just to give us a little more structure so that it's clear. And point being, we can all coordinate better around that.
The one thing it would slow down is like the rate at which we can SFI stuff, which I think is a good thing. So if we say we're putting 10 things to SFI, we should be saying in the next DevNet, we want to implement those 10 things. And if we think that's too much, then we have to pick, which subsets do we actually want to put in the next DevNet.
Sure, but yeah, so there's more discipline, but the whole point is to make like it's maybe slower in the short run, but it's better in the long run.
Right. Yeah. That's at least my idea. I'd be curious to hear, I don't know, from like client devs and the people who actually end up implementing this stuff. Like, does this seem reasonable? I guess if there's no comments, I'll leave the PR open up for a few more days for people to review, and I'll merge it by next week's Alcor devs if there's no concerns or pushback.
Yeah, works for me. Thank you. Okay. I think that was everything on the agenda. I'll see if there are any last minute additions. I don't see anything. Yeah, anything else? Otherwise, yeah, we're all very busy with Pectra and we'll close a little bit early and get to shipping. Okay, we got a ship in the chat. Cool. Okay. Well, then thanks everyone. And yeah, happy holidays and happy Pectra. I'll see you next time.
See ya.